The restaurant was closing when she did it. When she looked at the man in the tailored charcoal suit, placed the $100 bill back on the marble counter, and said softly, "I can't take this, sir." That moment, so quiet, so impossibly human, would shatter the walls around his heart before dawn. Before we go further, subscribe to be part of stories that still believe in love, because what happens next could have happened to any of us in a single unexpected night. It was past midnight in a downtown Manhattan restaurant that stayed open only for those who could afford to ignore the clock. The chandeliers hummed faintly, the air smelled of truffles and expensive wine. Daniel Ashford sat alone in his usual corner booth, staring at his untouched dessert. Billionaire, investor, philanthropist when cameras were near. Yet tonight, even success tasted bitter. The deal he had closed that day, one that would swallow an entire neighborhood for a skyscraper, had made him richer and emptier at once. When the waitress approached to clear his plate, he barely looked up. "Leave it," he murmured. His tone was clipped, rehearsed. She paused. "Of course, sir." Her name tag read, Lena Morales, 27, college dropout. The kind of woman who carried exhaustion like perfume and still managed to smile as if kindness were oxygen. She noticed the untouched cake, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the loneliness hiding behind his indifference. He reached for his wallet and dropped a crisp 100 onto the bill. "Keep the change." She hesitated, then met his eyes. Green meeting storm gray. "I'm sorry," she said, sliding the bill back toward him. "That's too much for a slice of cake you didn't eat." He frowned. "It's a tip. It feels like guilt," she replied, before she could stop herself. The words hung between them like smoke. For a second, neither moved. Then something flickered across his expression. Amusement? Irritation? He couldn't tell. No one ever spoke to him like that. Lena blushed. "I just mean, you don't have to prove anything. Not to me." He studied her, curious, despite himself. "Do you talk to all your customers this way?" "Only the ones who look like they've forgotten how to enjoy dessert." That made him laugh. An actual laugh, quiet and surprised. It had been months since anyone dared to remind him he was still human. When he finally left, the $100 bill remained on the table. She found it folded neatly beside the untouched cake. On its back, he had written only one word, "earn." She stared at it for a long moment before tucking it into the register. She wouldn't keep it. Something about him, the heaviness in his eyes, the isolation wrapped in wealth, made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. People like him didn't see people like her, and yet, for one fragile moment, he had looked straight into her. Outside, Daniel's driver waited with the car door open. Rain slicked the pavement, turning the city lights into rivers of gold. As the car pulled away, Daniel caught his reflection in the glass. Impeccable suit, cold eyes, the kind of man who built empires and demolished everything softer. He thought of her voice, steady, honest, inconvenient. It unsettled him. By the time he reached his penthouse overlooking the skyline, the sound of her words still echoed. "It feels like guilt." He poured himself a drink he didn't want, stood before a wall of glass, and watched the storm move over the city. For the first time in years, he wondered if all the zeros in his bank account could fill the silence between thunder. Lena closed the restaurant alone. The other waitresses had left hours ago, laughing about tips and Tinder matches. She wiped the last table, humming under her breath. The world outside was loud, but her life was simple. Rent due, mother's medication, night classes she could no longer afford. Yet she carried herself with quiet pride, the kind that comes from doing the right thing even when no one notices. She didn't know his name, didn't need to. To her, he was just another customer lost inside his own success. She only hoped he'd find something real someday. When she stepped out into the rain, the wind caught her hair and carried away the smell of the restaurant. She clutched her worn coat tighter and hurried toward her apartment 3 blocks away, a small space above a laundromat, walls thin enough to hear strangers' dreams through. She didn't see the black sedan idling half a block behind her, or the man inside still wrestling with the decision that would change both their lives before morning. In the car, Daniel leaned forward. "Sir?" his driver asked. "Turn around," Daniel said quietly. "Back to the restaurant?" He nodded. "There's something I forgot." He didn't know why he was doing it. He only knew that in a city of transactions and masks, a woman had dared to return what he couldn't buy, dared to call him out on his emptiness. He needed to see her again, not as the man with the money, but as the man she somehow saw beneath it. By the time they reached the restaurant, the lights were off. Rain tapped against the windows, Daniel stepped out anyway, coat over his shoulders, scanning the street. Across the avenue, under a flickering lamppost, he saw her silhouette, small, tired, real. She was locking the gate of a narrow apartment building. No umbrella, just dignity against the storm. He hesitated, unsure what he'd say if he caught up to her. He wasn't used to uncertainty. Every meeting in his life came with an agenda. This one didn't. Maybe that was what made it terrifying. Lena reached her door, shaking rain from her sleeves. The hallway smelled of detergent and damp paint. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. On her small kitchen table lay the $100 bill she had left in the register, dry, unfolded, waiting. Her breath caught. There was a note beside it, written in clean, elegant handwriting. "You were right. I don't know how to enjoy dessert. D." She turned toward the window instinctively, and through the glass she saw headlights fade into the storm. Her pulse quickened, confusion and unease mixing with something else she couldn't name. Who was he to cross that boundary? And why did part of her want to know what he would say if she opened the door right now and found him still there? Outside, footsteps echoed down the stairwell, measured, deliberate, familiar. She held her breath as a shadow paused on the other side of her door. She didn't move. The shadow on the other side of the door stood as still as the rain. Then a soft knock, 2 careful taps, as if the person asking entry already knew they didn't deserve it. "Who is it?" Lena asked, steadying her voice. "It's Daniel," came the answer, low and unmistakably controlled. "From the restaurant." The name slid into the apartment like a draft. He hadn't told her his name. She opened the deadbolt halfway and held the chain. He was there, tall, composed, rain purling on his coat. The hallway's yellow light carved him out of darkness, made his eyes look like slate under water. "How did my tip end up on my table?" she asked without greeting. He exhaled, a flicker of discomfort breaking through the armor. "I met your building manager downstairs, Mrs. Alvarez. I told her I'd left something behind at the restaurant that belonged to you. She insisted I shouldn't disturb you. I persuaded her to open the door so I could leave the note and go. I wasn't supposed to come back up." "Persuaded," Lena repeated, tasting the word. "Did you persuade her with money?" "I offered to pay for the broken dryer she mentioned," he said, too honest for it to be anything but damning. "That wasn't the point. It always is with your kind." She kept her hand on the chain. "What do you want, Daniel?" He looked briefly at the scuffed floor, then at her. "To apologize. For the way I tried to say thank you, for making a mess of it, and for the door." A beat of silence. The hallway smelled of old paint and lemon cleaner. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon tea and wet wool. Behind her, the $100 bill lay on the table like a witness. "You can apologize from there," she said, not unkindly. He nodded. The way he stood, contained, expensive, a man born to rooms that bent around him, seemed almost comical in this narrow corridor. Yet there was nothing funny about the tiredness in his face. "You were right," he said. "It was guilt, not about you. About everything." He almost smiled at his own vagueness. "That's not your problem." "No," she said, "but you made it mine when you came to my apartment." He accepted that. "Then let me make it less yours. Keep the money, not as a tip. Consider it an apology to Mrs. Alvarez. And what do I owe you for the dryer you just rescued with your wallet?" She tilted her head. Thank you can photograph for your philanthropic portfolio." Something flickered in his eyes, hurt, quickly buried. "You have a sharp edge. It keeps me from being cut in this city." She studied him, the way his gaze didn't drift over her the way some men's did. He looked into her like someone checking weather before a flight. "Why can't you enjoy dessert?" she asked softly. He didn't expect the question. After a moment, "Because I learned early that sweet things have a bill attached." Lena undid the chain. She didn't open the door wide, just enough to let the conversation into a warmer room. He didn't step forward. "Do you always fix problems by buying them quiet?" she said. "That depends on the problem." He slid his hands into his coat pockets. Without the brittle performance he wore in corner booths and boardrooms, his voice had an odd gentleness. "I don't usually have to explain myself to anyone." "That sounds lonely," she said. "It's expensive," he answered, and surprised himself by the truth in it. She gestured toward the table. "You wrote that I'd earned it. What did I do?" "You told me the truth when no one else does." His mouth quirked. "And you returned money I didn't deserve." "People deserve kindness," she said. "Money is just money." The rain drummed softly on the fire escape. "What do you do, Daniel? Besides fun dryers and ruined desserts?" He hesitated. "Investments. Real estate. I build things." "You take things apart first, though," she said. It wasn't an accusation so much as a thesis. He swallowed. Sometimes. A phone buzzed in his pocket. He silenced it without checking. She noticed. The part of her that counted tips and timed bus schedules wondered how many zeros pulsed on that screen. The part that loved stories wondered how many names had stopped calling him out of habit and how many he'd let go out of fear. "You should go," she said softly. "Not because I'm afraid, because maybe you are." He met her eyes, an admission in the silence. "May I—" He gestured, uncertain. "May I buy you breakfast tomorrow? Coffee? A chance to apologize where the door isn't between us?" She almost laughed. "You trying to turn this into a billionaire love story?" The phrase hung there, playful and bitter. A secret both of them recognized as a joke people like to watch, and rare humans survive. "No," he said. "I'm trying to say thank you, like a person who's forgotten how." Lena leaned on the doorframe. A woman at the end of the hall yelled for her dog in Spanish. A pipe clicked. The city inhaled. She looked at him, at the rain on his hair, at the way he stood so carefully still, as if moving too fast might break the fragile legitimacy of his being there. "Breakfast," she said slowly, "at 7. There's a place on 9th that doesn't charge extra for looking like you slept 3 hours." He nodded once, as if committing the terms of a merger to memory. 7. "And don't bring a car that blocks the hydrant," she added. "Mrs. Alvarez will murder you with a broom." "I'll walk," he said. She started to close the door, then paused. "Daniel." "Yes?" "If you ever need to leave something for me, slide it under the door like the rest of us." He dipped his head. "Noted." When the door clicked, he stayed a second longer, staring at the wood as if trying to memorize the grain. Then he turned toward the stairs. As he descended, his phone vibrated again. He looked this time. A thread of messages from a name he didn't save. Acquisitions, Ashford, filled the screen. City Council votes confirmed. Maple and 10th approved for redevelopment. Tenant notices drafted. Need your signature by morning. Maple and 10th. He pictured the laundromat's neon hum, the narrow stoop, the flicker of the lamppost. He stopped on the landing. Back upstairs, Lena wrapped her coat over the chair and made tea, hands finally shaking. Who was he when he wasn't polished? The note on her table glowed like a dare. She pressed her palms against the chipped counter and tried not to think of the way his voice softened when he said her name. Her phone buzzed on the table. "Yasmin from the restaurant. You alive? Manager says investor guy is some big deal developer. Be careful, Len. Rich man, poor woman always ends in disaster. Also, I stole a chocolate mousse for you. It's in the staff fridge. True love stories begin with chocolate." Lena smiled despite herself. She texted back, "I can handle breakfast, I've handled worse." "When has your life not been a romantic drama?" Yasmin wrote. "Forbidden love is not on the menu. It's just coffee," Lena answered, but the words didn't feel honest. She brewed her tea and stared at the rain, at the $100 apology, at the question beating in her ribs. Why did I let him in at all? Down the block, the black sedan idled and then pulled away, leaving the street emptier than before. Daniel walked without the car as promised, collar up, mind racing in a way numbers never caused. Maple and 10th, his project, her block. His company's letterhead would soon be tape on her door. He could fix it, a voice trained by power whispered. He could move numbers, slow permits, buy time. But at what price? To the plan, to his board, to the armor he'd welded over the years. And what did it mean that the idea of disappointing his investors felt easier than disappointing the woman who returned his money? He stopped under the awning of a deli and watched the storm. Rainwater collected in the gutter, glossy as ink. In the window, a TV played a news segment about urban renewal, with the brightness turned up too high. He imagined her face when she learned who he was, what he was about to do to her street. The word betrayal was a weight in his palm, cold and exact. At 7, he would meet her. He would ask about her mother's medicine she could barely afford, the night classes she'd stopped taking, why she'd chosen to refuse an easy windfall. And he would have to decide whether he could become a man she might someday trust, or remain the architect of her heartbreak and redemption, another wealthy ghost passing through a life that didn't belong to him. The rain slowed. Neon flickered. Somewhere above the laundromat, a window opened, and a woman laughed in Spanish at a joke Lena couldn't hear. Daniel turned back toward Maple and 10th, toward the building where a new notice would soon be taped. In apartment 3B, Lena's kettle whistled. She reached to switch it off and paused, listening. The hallway was quiet. The quiet felt like a held breath, the kind that comes right before a door receives news it cannot unhear. The morning after the storm smelled like wet asphalt and burnt coffee. Lena stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair into a loose ponytail, telling herself she wasn't nervous. It was just breakfast, just a man saying sorry. Yet she'd changed her blouse 3 times before settling on one that didn't look like she cared too much. Down the street, Daniel was already waiting. No car, no driver, no coat that screamed boardroom. Just jeans, a dark sweater, and a face that looked like he'd slept even less than she had. He had walked the 5 blocks from his penthouse deliberately, trying to remember the last time he had walked anywhere for a reason that wasn't business. The diner on 9th was a relic of another era. Checkered floor, fogged windows, waitresses who called everyone on. When Lena walked in, Daniel stood immediately, earning a few curious glances from the regulars. He looked out of place, yet somehow smaller, without the armor of power around him. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "You?" She smiled faintly. "Same." They sat. A waitress poured coffee without asking. Steam rose between them like a fragile truce. "I found out who you are," Lena said after a moment. "Ashford Holdings, the towers, the neighborhoods you buy just to replace them." He didn't flinch. "I guessed you might. So, what happens to Maple and 10th? She asked quietly. He hesitated. "That project's still in discussion." "You mean it's already decided?" He looked down, then met her eyes. "I didn't come here to defend it." "Good," she said. "Because you can't." The air between them tensed. Daniel's instincts, negotiator, strategist, survivor, rose, but he forced them down. He'd come here for something else. "When I saw you last night," he said slowly, "you made me realize how detached I've become. Every deal feels like math. Profitable, clean, justified. But last night didn't." Lena stirred her coffee. "You can afford to feel bad for one night and go back to your world tomorrow. The rest of us live where your projects happen." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here. I can't fix everything I've done, but maybe I can start understanding what I've destroyed." She studied him for a long time. There was sincerity there, raw, unpolished, almost painful. "You sound like someone trying to buy redemption," she said softly. He smiled without warmth. "I probably am." The waitress brought their plates. Pancakes for him, eggs, and toast for her. Neither touched the food right away. Outside, sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping their faces with alternating lines of light and shadow, like the world couldn't decide what to make of them. "Tell me something," Daniel said. "Why didn't you take the tip?" "Because it wasn't about money," she replied. "It was about dignity. I don't like feeling like a transaction." He nodded. "Neither do I. But that's all I've been for years." For the first time she saw it clearly, the exhaustion behind his confidence, the loneliness built from marble and glass. She had spent her life working to survive. He had spent his building a fortress to hide in, and both were tired of pretending it was enough. A silence settled, not awkward but heavy. Then Lena spoke again. "So what happens now?" He leaned back. "I don't know. Maybe we just talk." And they did. About her mother's heart condition. About his father's empire, the ruthless mentorship that shaped him. About what it cost to keep winning. Somewhere between coffee refills and shared laughter over the diner's burnt toast, something shifted. The walls lowered, not in dramatic confessions, but in small recognitions. Two people from different worlds realizing that loneliness speaks the same language everywhere. When the check arrived, Daniel reached for it automatically. Lena stopped him with a look. "How you pay it turns into something it isn't." He withdrew his hand, nodding. "Then you get the next one." She raised an eyebrow. "Assuming there is a next one." He smiled. "A real one, quiet, unguarded." "I'll risk that." As they stepped outside, the wind caught her hair. The city was alive again, indifferent and beautiful. Daniel walked her halfway home, their pace slow, conversation easy. At the corner, she stopped. "Whatever you're thinking about Maple and 10th, don't make promises you can't keep." He looked at her. "What if I already broke one? Then learn from it." He wanted to say more, to tell her he couldn't bear the idea of her losing her home, to promise he'd stop the demolition, but he knew how false promises sound coming from men like him, so he just nodded. "Breakfast again sometime?" She hesitated, then smiled. "We'll see." She turned to cross the street, and for the first time in years he felt something he couldn't quantify or control. Hope, fragile and dangerous. But as she disappeared into the crowd, his phone rang. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Adrian Holt, his partner and oldest friend. "Daniel," Adrian's voice crackled through. "We've got a problem." Someone leaked our acquisition plans. The press is sniffing around Maple and 10th. If this goes public before the deal closes, we're done." Daniel's chest tightened. "Who leaked it?" "No idea, but whoever lives there knows what's coming now. We need to move fast." He looked toward the direction Lena had gone, the weight of the conversation settling like a stone in his chest. "Don't move anything yet," he said finally. "I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" Adrian demanded. Daniel didn't answer. He was already crossing the street, his mind racing with two impossible truths. The woman who had made him feel human again lived in the neighborhood his company was about to erase, and the only way to protect her might destroy everything he'd built. That night, Lena found a letter slipped under her door. No name, no signature, just a single line in clean handwriting she already recognized. "Don't sign anything they give you. Not yet." She froze, heart pounding. She looked out the window, but the street was empty. Somewhere a storm was gathering again, one that had nothing to do with rain. Lena stared at the note long after the words blurred into shadows. "Don't sign anything they give you. Not yet." She turned it over, blank. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She checked the hallway, but it was empty, the only movement a cat slipping past a broken door. For the first time since meeting Daniel, fear crawled through the space he had once filled with curiosity. That same evening, Daniel sat in his office at the top of the Ashford Tower, the city sprawling beneath him like a living organism he both commanded and feared. Adrian paced near the window, talking fast, his voice sharp with anxiety. "The tenants are organizing, Daniel. Someone told them about the relocation clauses. If this gets out before the council's vote, we'll lose millions." Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at the rain outside, tracing the droplets racing down the glass. In each reflection he saw her, her defiance, her honesty, the way she had looked at him as if she could see the boy buried beneath the empire. Adrian stopped pacing. "What's wrong with you? You've been distracted for days." "Maybe I'm just tired of profiting off other people's losses," Daniel said quietly. Adrian scoffed. "Don't start with the morality act. You built this company to survive your father's shadow. You want to throw it away now because of a waitress?" Daniel turned slowly, his expression cold but wounded. "Careful." "I'm serious," Adrian said. "She's one of them, Daniel. If she lives on that block, she'll be evicted when construction begins. You can't protect her without ruining everything you've worked for." He wanted to argue, but Adrian was right. Every word. The paradox burned through him. Protect her, lose everything, protect himself, destroy her world. There was no middle ground, only a line that demanded he choose what kind of man he wanted to be. Lena didn't sleep. The letter lay on her nightstand, a silent warning she didn't understand. At dawn, she went downstairs to find Mrs. Alvarez arguing with two men in suits. One held a clipboard, the other a folder marked "Notice of Redevelopment." The words Ashford Holdings were stamped in the corner. Her stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping closer. "Eviction notices," Mrs. Alvarez said, voice trembling. "They say we have 60 days. Can you believe that? 60! Lena's eyes darted to the document. She didn't need to read it all to know what it meant. Daniel's company, his project, his silence. The truth hit harder than any betrayal she had ever known. She felt her chest tighten, anger and disbelief twisting together. She had breakfast with the man behind her eviction. She had smiled at him, trusted him. At noon, Daniel walked into the restaurant where she worked, the bell over the door chiming as if nothing had changed. But she saw him instantly. Her hands froze mid-pour, coffee spilling over the cup's rim. She didn't move, didn't speak. "Can we talk?" he asked softly, voice stripped of confidence. "You should go," she said, barely audible. "Please, Lena, just a minute." Her co-workers exchanged glances. Yasmin, her closest friend, whispered something, but Lena didn't hear it. The sound in her head was roaring, memories of laughter, the way his voice had softened, the look in his eyes when he said he wanted to change. Lies, all of it. She set down the coffee pot. "A minute," she said, walking toward the back alley. He followed, the world narrowing to the sound of their footsteps. When the door closed behind them, the silence was suffocating. "You knew," she said. He hesitated. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since before we met." Her throat tightened. "And you still came to me. You still—" She stopped herself. "Was I a distraction? Something to make you feel less guilty?" "No," he said quickly. "Lena, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it, Daniel? A charity project? You saw a waitress and thought you could buy her conscience the same way you buy everything else." He stepped closer, but she flinched back. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. When I found out you lived there, I tried to stop it. Stop it? You own it." Her voice broke. "You are it." He looked down, hands trembling slightly. "You're right. I built the system that did this, but I'm trying. Trying doesn't give me 60 more days in my home," she cut in. "You can't fix this with guilt, Daniel. Not this time." The words hit him like a blade he knew he deserved. He had faced boardrooms of predators and never flinched, but her disappointment left him exposed, small, unbearably human. "Please," he said, voice raw. "Let me help you." "Help me," she echoed, shaking her head. "You already did. You reminded me why I stopped believing people like you could ever love anything they can't own." She turned and walked back inside, leaving him alone in the alley, the sound of the rain beginning again, steady and merciless. That night, Daniel returned to his penthouse and poured himself a drink he didn't touch. Adrian's words replayed in his head, venomous and true. She's one of them, but she wasn't. She was the only person who had seen him clearly, and now she hated him for exactly that. He opened his laptop and pulled up the redevelopment files. 60 days, contracts ready, council signatures pending, everything running smoothly, except him. He found Lena's address in the tenant records. Apartment 3B, Maple and 10th, a red stamp marked Relocation Phase 1. He stared at it for a long time before opening another file, Private Holdings. One transfer, one purchase, and the building could be his personally, outside corporate control. It would ruin his partnership with Adrian. It might trigger lawsuits, but it would save her home. He hovered over the confirmation line, hand trembling. "If I do this, I lose everything." He thought of her voice. "You can't fix this with guilt." Maybe not. But he could try to fix it with action. He clicked confirm. The next morning, Lena was packing boxes when Mrs. Alvarez came pounding on her door, waving a new notice. "Look," she said breathlessly. "It says the building's been bought by a private owner. Redevelopment cancelled. We're safe, for now." Lena froze. "What?" Mrs. Alvarez handed her the paper. There was no company name this time, only a single signature at the bottom. Daniel Ashford. The room tilted. She sank onto the edge of her bed, the paper shaking in her hands. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that one man had just traded an empire for a chance at redemption, and that one woman was about to face the unbearable question of whether forgiveness was ever worth that much. She folded the notice slowly, placed it on the table beside the old letter, and whispered to herself, "I don't know if I can forgive him, but I can't hate him either." And somewhere across town, Daniel stood by his office window, watching the sunrise over a skyline that no longer belonged to him, wondering if losing everything had finally made him free, or just unbearably alone. Lena didn't go to work the next day. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the notice that bore his signature, as if the ink itself could explain what kind of man would destroy and save her world in the same breath. Every time she looked at his name, her chest tightened. Gratitude and anger coexisted like storm fronts colliding. He had given her back her home, but at what cost? And why? She thought of calling him, then stopped herself. What would she even say? "Thank you for buying the building you were about to demolish?" The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. Down the street, the neighborhood was alive again. People were smiling, hugging, sharing rumors that someone mysterious had saved them from eviction. No one knew who, but Lena did. And that secret sat like a stone in her chest. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel was in a different kind of silence. His office was half empty. Adrian had already removed his personal items. The board had voted that morning. Conflict of interest, they called it. Unprofessional behavior. The truth was simpler. He had defied them, and they wanted their empire back. He stood by the window, tie loosened, watching the clouds roll in. For years he'd imagined freedom as a penthouse view, a jet waiting on standby, numbers rising in green columns. But now that he had none of it, the air felt lighter, the noise in his mind quieter. He had traded power for peace, and he wasn't sure yet if it was a victory or surrender. The door opened. Adrian entered without knocking, his face carved with betrayal. "You signed it," he said. "You actually signed it." Daniel didn't look at him. "It's done. You gave away a $100 million project for a woman who serves coffee." Daniel turned now, his expression steady. "For a woman who reminded me what it feels like to be human." Adrian laughed bitterly. "You think that makes you noble? You've destroyed everything we built. Our investors will crucify you. Do you have any idea what comes next?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "Peace." Adrian stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You'll regret this, Daniel. They always do." He left without another word, the sound of the door closing echoing like the final stroke of a gavel. Daniel stayed still for a long time. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the polite smile of boardrooms, but something smaller, realer. He had nothing left to lose, except the one person who still didn't know what to do with his redemption. That evening, Lena heard a knock at her door. She froze. Through the peephole she saw him. No suit this time, just jeans and a plain shirt. He looked different. Not poorer, but simpler. She hesitated, then opened the door halfway. "I shouldn't be here," he said, "but I didn't know where else to go." "You bought the building," she said quietly. He nodded. "It's yours now. Yours and the tenants. I signed it over this morning." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I don't own it anymore," he said. "You do. Technically, the deed is under a co-op. You and the others will manage it. No rent increases. No redevelopment. It's safe." Her mouth fell open. "Daniel, why?" He looked at her for a long moment, searching for words that didn't sound like excuses. "Because I couldn't bear to be the reason you lost your home, and because I needed to do one thing right before I disappear." She shook her head, stunned. "Disappear? I'm done with the company. They forced me out. Everything I built, it's gone." She stared at him, trying to make sense of the man before her. "You gave it all up. For this? For you," he said simply. "For the version of myself I saw when I was with you." Her throat tightened. "That's not fair," she whispered. "You can't build your redemption on me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm building it because of you." The room fell quiet. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the window like a memory returning. She stepped back, letting him in for the first time. He looked around her small apartment, the mismatched chairs, the plants struggling for sunlight, the photos pinned to the fridge. It was humble, imperfect, and alive. Everything his world had forgotten to be. "You didn't have to lose everything," she said finally. "I think I did," he replied, "to remember what matters." Lena leaned against the counter, her voice soft. "And what if I can't forgive you?" "Then I'll understand," he said, "but at least I'll know I tried." Something in his honesty disarmed her completely. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to remember how betrayal felt. But standing there, seeing the quiet devastation in his eyes, she realized forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about freeing herself from the weight of resentment. She walked to the table, took the old letter, the one that had warned her not to sign anything, and placed it beside the new deed. 2 pieces of paper that told the story of who he was and who he had become. "You should stay for dinner," she said, almost in a whisper. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." He smiled faintly. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything anymore," she said, "but maybe that's a start." As she turned to cook, Daniel stood watching her, feeling something stir deep inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt since before wealth had hollowed him out. For the first time, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a failure. He just felt human. But outside, parked under the streetlight, a familiar black car waited. Adrian sat behind the wheel, eyes fixed on the apartment. He wasn't done with Daniel. Not yet. And as the rain fell harder, Lena and Daniel shared a fragile peace inside, unaware that their story was about to turn again. This time, not because of guilt or money, but because love was about to be tested by the one thing it could never control, the past. The smell of tomato sauce filled the apartment, mixing with the faint sound of rain. Lena stirred the pot, trying to calm her nerves, while Daniel set the table with quiet precision, as if arranging plates could make up for everything his money had once broken. Neither spoke much. The rhythm of clinking utensils and simmering sauce said enough. Every so often she caught him watching her with that strange mixture of admiration and regret, the look of a man who couldn't believe he was allowed to stay in the room. When they finally sat down, Daniel picked up his fork, but his hands trembled slightly. He laughed under his breath. "I haven't eaten something homemade in years." "Don't get your hopes up," she said, almost smiling. "I'm better at pouring coffee than cooking." He took a bite. "Then I've been missing out on a lot of good coffee." That made her laugh for real. It broke something open between them, something that had been too heavy to carry. For a few minutes, the world outside didn't exist. Not the company, not the betrayal, not the rain, just 2 people finally able to breathe. After dinner, she poured them tea. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel leaned back, his gaze distant. "Now I figure out who I am, without Ashford Holdings." "That sounds lonely," she said. "It's a different kind of loneliness," he admitted. "For years, I was surrounded by people who wanted what I could give them. But when I stopped giving, they disappeared. You're the first person who ever wanted nothing from me." She looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe that's why you couldn't buy me." He smiled, a trace of sadness in it. "Maybe." The sound of thunder rolled outside. The lights flickered once. For a moment, it felt like the city was holding its breath. "I'm going to tell you something," Daniel said quietly. "When I was a kid, my father used to say that power keeps you safe. He believed love was a weakness. So I built a life on his rules. Money first, feelings later. But you—" He looked down, his voice softer now. "You made me want to break them." Lena's eyes softened. "Then break them," she said. "Start there." He nodded, but before he could reply, a loud knock startled them both. Lena stood. Who could that be at this hour? Daniel's face changed instantly. He knew. The kind of knowing that comes from a past that refuses to stay buried. "Stay here," he said, standing up. She frowned. "Daniel—" But he was already moving toward the door. When he opened it, Adrian stood in the hallway, soaked from the rain, eyes sharp with fury. "Well," Adrian said, "isn't this cozy?" Lena froze. She didn't know who he was, but she didn't like the look in his eyes. "Adrian," Daniel said evenly, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Adrian snapped. "How you think you can just walk away? You think you can throw everything we built into the fire because you fell in love with a waitress?" Lena flinched, but Daniel stepped forward. "Watch your mouth," Adrian laughed, bitter and cruel. "What's the plan, huh? Play poor for a while, pretend you're one of them. You can't change who you are, Daniel. You were born to win, and she—" He pointed at Lena. "She's the kind of collateral you used to step over." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." Adrian's smile vanished. "You just cost me everything. Investors are pulling out. The board wants blood. Do you have any idea what I had to promise them to keep your name off the headlines?" Lena's stomach turned. "What headlines?" Adrian looked at her, then at Daniel. "Oh, he didn't tell you? The press found out about Maple and 10th. They know he was sleeping with a tenant while the deal was collapsing. You're not just a story, sweetheart. You're a scandal." Lena's face went pale. She looked at Daniel, horror dawning. "Is that true?" He shook his head. "Not like that." "Not like that." Adrian laughed. "You think the world cares about context? They'll call it a billionaire love story turned tragedy, a forbidden love built on lies. Heartbreak and redemption, the perfect headline." Lena stepped back, her breath unsteady. "You said no one knew about me." "I didn't tell them," Daniel said quickly. "Adrian, stop this." But Adrian wasn't finished. "You ruined me, Daniel. You took everything. So I'm giving something back. The story goes live tomorrow morning. Your name, her name, everything." Daniel's face hardened. "Then we're both finished." "Maybe," Adrian said. "But at least I won't be alone in the ashes." He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing like a verdict. When the door closed, silence filled the room again. Only the rain spoke. Lena couldn't look at him. "You said you were done with that world. You said it was over." "I am," he said, "but it doesn't mean it's done with me." She sank into a chair, trembling. "They're going to drag me through the mud. My name, my job, everything." "I won't let them," he said. "You can't stop them," she whispered. "Not this time." Daniel crouched beside her, his voice breaking. "Lena, I'll fix it." She met his eyes, and for the first time she didn't see the man who had saved her home. She saw the man whose world could still destroy hers. "Don't," she said quietly. "You've done enough." She stood, walked to the window and stared out at the storm. He stayed on the floor, watching her silhouette framed against the light, realizing that love had brought him back to life, but it might also be the thing that finally broke him. Outside, Adrian's car disappeared into the dark. Somewhere in the city, the first whispers of a scandal began to spread. And inside the small apartment where it had all started, with a tip refused and a truth too big to hide, two hearts waited for the storm to decide what kind of story they would become. 2002, 11/10/2025. Philippe Goulart. The smell of tomato sauce filled the apartment, mixing with the faint sound of rain. Lena stirred the pot, trying to calm her nerves, while Daniel set the table with quiet precision, as if arranging plates could make up for everything his money had once broken. Neither spoke much. The rhythm of clinking utensils and simmering sauce said enough. Every so often, she caught him watching her with that strange mixture of admiration and regret, the look of a man who couldn't believe he was allowed to stay in the room. When they finally sat down, Daniel picked up his fork, but his hands trembled slightly. He laughed under his breath. "I haven't eaten something homemade in years." "Don't get your hopes up," she said, almost smiling. "I'm better at pouring coffee than cooking." He took a bite. "Then I've been missing out on a lot of good coffee." That made her laugh for real. It broke something open between them, something that had been too heavy to carry. For a few minutes, the world outside didn't exist. Not the company, not the betrayal, not the rain. Just two people finally able to breathe. After dinner, she poured them tea. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel leaned back, his gaze distant. "Now I figure out who I am without Ashford Holdings." "That sounds lonely," she said. "It's a different kind of loneliness," he admitted. "For years I was surrounded by people who wanted what I could give them. But when I stopped giving, they disappeared. You're the first person who ever wanted nothing from me." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why you couldn't buy me." He smiled, a trace of sadness in it. "Maybe." The sound of thunder rolled outside. The lights flickered once. For a moment it felt like the city was holding its breath. "I'm going to tell you something," Daniel said quietly. "When I was a kid, my father used to say that power keeps you safe. He believed love was a weakness. So I built a life on his rules. Money first, feelings later. But you—" He looked down, his voice softer now. "You made me want to break them." Lena's eyes softened. "Then break them," she said. "Start there." He nodded, but before he could reply, a loud knock startled them both. Lena stood. Who could that be at this hour? Daniel's face changed instantly. He knew, the kind of knowing that comes from a past that refuses to stay buried. "Stay here," he said, standing up. She frowned. "Daniel," but he was already moving toward the door. When he opened it, Adrian stood in the hallway, soaked from the rain, eyes sharp with fury. "Well," Adrian said, "isn't this cozy?" Lena froze. She didn't know who he was, but she didn't like the look in his eyes. "Adrian," Daniel said evenly, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Adrian snapped. "You think you can just walk away? You think you can throw everything we built into the fire because you fell in love with a waitress?" Lena flinched, but Daniel stepped forward. "Watch your mouth." Adrian laughed, bitter and cruel. "What's the plan, huh? Play poor for a while? Pretend you're one of them? You can't change who you are, Daniel. You were born to win. And she—" he pointed at Lena. "She's the kind of collateral you used to step over." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." Adrian's smile vanished. "You just cost me everything. Investors are pulling out. The board wants blood. Do you have any idea what I had to promise them to keep your name off the headlines?" Lena's stomach turned. "What headlines?" Adrian looked at her, then at Daniel. "Oh, he didn't tell you? The press found out about Maple and 10th. They know he was sleeping with a tenant while the deal was collapsing. You're not just a story, sweetheart, you're a scandal." Lena's face went pale. She looked at Daniel, horror dawning. "Is that true?" He shook his head. "Not like that." "Not like that?" Adrian laughed. "You think the world cares about context? They'll call it a billionaire love story turned tragedy, a forbidden love built on lies, heartbreak and redemption. The perfect headline." Lena stepped back, her breath unsteady. "You said no one knew about me." "I didn't tell them," Daniel said quickly. "Adrian, stop this." But Adrian wasn't finished. "You ruined me, Daniel. You took everything, so I'm giving something back. The story goes live tomorrow morning. Your name, her name, everything." Daniel's face hardened. "Then we're both finished." "Maybe," Adrian said, "but at least I won't be alone in the ashes." He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing like a verdict. When the door closed, silence filled the room again. Only the rain spoke. Lena couldn't look at him. "You said you were done with that world. You said it was over." "I am," he said, "but it doesn't mean it's done with me." She sank into a chair, trembling. "They're going to drag me through the mud. My name, my job, everything. I won't let them," he said. "You can't stop them," she whispered. "Not this time." Daniel crouched beside her, his voice breaking. "Lena, I'll fix it." She met his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't see the man who had saved her home. She saw the man whose world could still destroy hers. "Don't," she said quietly. "You've done enough." She stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the storm. He stayed on the floor, watching her silhouette framed against the light, realizing that love had brought him back to life, but it might also be the thing that finally broke him. Outside, Adrian's car disappeared into the dark. Somewhere in the city, the first whispers of a scandal began to spread, and inside the small apartment where it had all started, with a tip refused and a truth too big to hide, two hearts waited for the storm to decide what kind of story they would become. By morning, the world already knew. Lena woke to the vibration of her phone, the screen flooding with messages, news alerts, voicemails, social media notifications. She blinked, disoriented, until the words on the first headline hit her like a punch to the chest. Billionaire Daniel Ashford steps down amid scandal. Secret affair with waitress from redevelopment zone. Her breath caught. Her photo was there, taken outside the diner, blurry but unmistakable. She scrolled down with trembling hands. Every line was worse than the last. Speculation, judgment, lies dressed as sympathy. Words like forbidden love, betrayal, class difference, romance turned her life into entertainment. She felt the room closing in, the air thick with humiliation. In the hallway, voices whispered. Someone had left a newspaper by her door. The headline circled in red marker. When she opened it, a photo of Daniel stared back at her. Calm, defiant, elegant, even in disgrace. The caption read, "Love beyond money or calculated redemption." She sank onto the couch, numb. The teapot on the stove began to whistle, but she didn't move. The knock came just as she covered her face with her hands. "Lena," Daniel's voice. "Go away." He hesitated. "Please, just let me explain." "There's nothing left to explain," she said, voice breaking. "They know everything. I can fix this." She laughed bitterly. "You keep saying that." When she finally opened the door, he stood there, rain-soaked again, looking almost the same as the night they first met. Except now, the weight in his eyes was heavier, and the world was watching. "You need to leave," she said. "The cameras were outside earlier. They'll follow you here." "I don't care." "I do." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They want a villain, Lena. Let it be me. Let them destroy me if it keeps you safe." "Safe?" she repeated. "There's no safe anymore. You should have told me. About the deal, about everything." "I was afraid," he said softly. "Afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd never let me near you." Her voice shook. "You were right." The silence between them felt like an ocean. He tried to bridge it, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "You can't show up and decide who gets hurt. You can't save me one day and ruin me the next." "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said, "but I'll face it. All of it." "Good," she whispered, "because I can't face it with you." She closed the door before he could answer. The story spread like fire. News anchors, gossip shows, podcasts, all repeating the same narrative. The billionaire who fell for the waitress he almost evicted. The modern fairy tale turned tragedy. Lena lost her job by noon. The manager, sympathetic but firm, said the restaurant couldn't afford unwanted attention. She didn't argue. She packed her apron and left quietly, keeping her head down as she walked past the photographers waiting outside. Daniel's face was everywhere. Some called him a romantic, others a fraud. His company stocks plummeted. Lawsuits followed. The board blamed him for everything, and the city council launched an investigation into his past projects. That night, he sat alone in his now empty penthouse, the skyline flickering like a memory. The phone rang non-stop. Lawyers, journalists, former allies now eager to bury him deeper. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he called one number. "Lena." Her voice was tired, distant. "Why are you calling?" "I just wanted to hear your voice." "You shouldn't." "I know." He hesitated. "I bought a cabin outside the city, just for a while, somewhere quiet. If you ever need to disappear too." "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't offer me escape, Daniel. You keep trying to fix things by running from them." He closed his eyes. "Maybe I just don't know another way." "Then learn," she said. "Start by facing the truth alone." The line went silent for a moment before she spoke again, softer now. "Goodbye, Daniel." And then the click. Weeks passed. The storm moved on, but the damage stayed. Lena stopped checking the news. The neighborhood slowly adjusted to its strange fame. Tourists taking photos outside the diner, reporters asking for exclusive interviews. She avoided them all. She started volunteering at a community center nearby, helping other tenants understand housing contracts, teaching them how to protect themselves from redevelopment deals. It wasn't much, but it gave her purpose again. Sometimes she thought of him, wondered if he ever found peace in that cabin, wondered if he still missed the noise of the city he once owned. Then one afternoon, as she was leaving the center, she found a plain envelope in her mailbox. No name, no address, just her own, written in the familiar, deliberate handwriting she'd once traced with her fingers. Inside, there was no letter, just a folded newspaper clipping dated 2 days earlier. "Former billionaire Daniel Ashford donates entire remaining estate to Urban Housing Fund." And beneath it, a handwritten note. "I kept one promise, you were right. Some things aren't for sale." Her hands trembled. She sat on the steps, staring at the words until they blurred. Then, for the first time in weeks, she smiled through her tears. Because maybe love beyond money wasn't a fantasy. Maybe it was this, quiet, unseen, imperfect, a redemption no one would write about. But across town, in a newsroom that fed on scandal, another headline was already in preparation. Rumors that Daniel had vanished after the donation, his accounts closed, his last known address abandoned. The reporter writing it paused, frowning at the silence around the story. No trace, no statement, no goodbye, just absence. And somewhere beyond the city lights, deep in the countryside where no cameras could find him, Daniel stood outside a small cabin, looking up at a sky unbroken by towers. For the first time in his life, he felt invisible and finally entirely free. But freedom came with a question that wouldn't leave him. Would she ever forgive him enough to find him again? Winter came early that year. The first frost glazed the windows of Lena's apartment, tracing patterns that looked like maps to places she didn't recognize. She had stopped expecting letters, but sometimes, when the wind pressed against the glass, she still found herself glancing at the mailbox downstairs, half hoping, half fearing another sign of him. 3 months had passed since the donation story. The world had moved on. The scandal had burned itself out, devouring everything it could before turning cold. But silence had its own noise. It echoed in the absence of what once was. She was different now, stronger maybe. Her shifts at the community center grew longer. She helped people file for housing grants, organized tenants' rights meetings, even mediate disputes. The local newspaper had written a short piece about her efforts. No headlines, no drama, just a quiet mention. Former Waitress helps rebuild what gentrification tried to erase. When she saw her name in print, she thought of him again. The man who had taught her that power could destroy, but also restore. She wondered if he had seen it. If he was still somewhere far from the noise, fighting to believe that doing good without applause still mattered. That night she closed the center late. The snow was falling softly, muffling the city's usual chaos. As she stepped into the street, she saw a small crowd gathered near the diner where she used to work. At first she thought it was another protest or a film shoot. Both had become common in that part of town. But when she got closer, she saw why everyone had stopped. A car had crashed into the corner hydrant, water shooting up into the air like a fountain. The driver, a young man, was fine, just shaken, and beside him, kneeling to help, was someone she never expected to see again, Daniel. He looked thinner, his hair longer, a faint beard shadowing his face. He was wearing a dark coat dusted with snow, and his hands were steady as he guided the driver away from the wreck. The scene was chaotic, but he moved through it with calm precision, as if the noise couldn't touch him anymore. Their eyes met across the flashing lights. For a second, time folded in on itself. The restaurant, the rain, the lies, the redemption, all collapsing into one impossible heartbeat. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then, slowly, Daniel handed the driver off to the paramedics and began walking toward her. The crowd seemed to dissolve around them, as though the city itself understood that something unfinished was finding its way home. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly when he stopped in front of her. "I didn't plan to be," he said. "I came back for a meeting with the housing board. I wanted to make sure the fund was working." "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't think you'd want me to." She studied him. There was no arrogance now, no trace of the man who once measured worth in billions. There was just Daniel, the one who had shown up in the rain, broken but honest. "I saw the news," she said. "You gave everything away." He nodded. "It wasn't mine to keep." "You disappeared." "I had to," he said. "I needed to understand who I was without the noise, without the money, without you." Her breath caught. "Without me?" He stepped closer. "Because every time I tried to make things right, I did it to prove something. To you, to myself, to the world. But real redemption isn't about proving. It's about changing." She looked down, snow gathering on her coat. "And did you change?" "I hope so," he said. "But that's not for me to decide." A pause stretched between them, long and fragile. Then she asked, "Why come back now?" He smiled faintly. "Because I wanted to see if I could stand in front of you without hiding." The honesty in his voice cut through her defenses. She had imagined this moment so many times. What she would say, how she would keep her heart locked behind all the reasons she shouldn't forgive him. But standing there, in the middle of falling snow, every word felt small compared to what was in his eyes. "You could have called," she said. "I didn't want to make you choose," he said quietly, "between peace and the past." "And what if I already did?" He looked at her, almost afraid to ask. "Which one?" She smiled, tears warming her eyes despite the cold. "Maybe they're not different anymore. The wind carried their silence, soft and full. Behind them, someone started clapping, one of the bystanders, mistaking the reunion for some public gesture. It made them both laugh, the sound fragile and human. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I kept something for you." "What is it?" He handed it to her. It was the first note she'd ever written him, the one that had come back to her apartment that night. The paper was worn, edges frayed. On the back, beneath her old words, he had written something new. "Love doesn't need witnesses." She pressed the note to her chest, the cold forgotten. He looked at her, eyes full of quiet wonder. "Do you still make terrible pasta?" She laughed through the tears. "Worse than ever." "Then maybe," he said, voice soft, hopeful, "you could make it one more time." Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. She reached for his hand, slowly, deliberately, and the snow kept falling around them, erasing footprints, forgiving the past. As they walked down the street, the world didn't cheer or condemn. It simply let them be. Two souls no longer separated by guilt or fortune, but connected by something simpler, understanding. For the first time since the night she refused his tip, they were just Daniel and Lena. And in that quiet, imperfect walk home, something neither of them had dared to name finally became real. The small apartment above the laundromat hadn't changed much. The same chipped counters, the same flickering kitchen light, the same soft hum of the city through the thin walls. But as Daniel stepped inside again, this time without guilt, without secrets, it felt different, alive. Lena took off her coat, hanging it by the door. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of recognition, the kind that comes only after people have broken each other, forgiven and returned anyway. "I didn't think I'd ever walk back in here," Daniel said, his voice low. "Neither did I," she answered, pouring water into the kettle. "But life likes full circles." He smiled faintly. "You kept the plant alive." "Barely," she said. "It survives on neglect." He met her eyes. "Then we have that in common." The words hung in the air, gentle, self-aware, almost tender. She turned back to the stove, pretending not to smile. The tea kettle began to whistle. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him. "So what now, Daniel? You're not a billionaire anymore. You're just you." He leaned against the table, watching the steam curl upward. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Do you miss it? The power?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes. The illusion of control is addictive, but it also made me blind. I used to think money could buy peace. Turns out it only rents silence." Lena nodded slowly. "And what about love?" He looked at her, eyes soft. "Love isn't something you own. It's something you earn, one honest moment at a time." She took a sip of her tea, letting the warmth settle between them. "You sound like a man who finally believes in what he says." "I had a good teacher," he said. "Flattery won't fix the lights," she teased. He laughed, the sound easy and unguarded. "Let me try anyway." He stood and reached for the switch near the window, giving it a firm tap. The bulb flickered, then glowed steady for the first time in months. She raised an eyebrow. "Look at that. Maybe you can fix things after all." "Some things," he said. "Not everything." The conversation drifted, light and familiar. They talked about her work at the center, about the people she'd helped, about the strange peace of doing something that mattered. Daniel listened quietly, the way men listen when they finally understand that being heard is rarer than being loved. When she mentioned she was helping the tenants start a cooperative cafe, his eyes lit up. "You're building something," he said. "I guess so," she replied. "It's small, but it's ours. I'd like to help." She shook her head. "Not with money." "Not with money," he agreed. "With time." Lena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe." The night stretched quietly after that, the kind of quiet that felt like healing. He stayed on the couch while she tidied up. Outside, snow drifted past the window, reflecting the faint glow of the street lamp. He watched her move through the room, graceful in the simple way people are when they belong somewhere. "Lena," he said softly. She turned. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd taken the tip that night?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I think it saved me," he said. "Then I guess refusing it saved us both." She walked closer, her expression calm but full of something deeper, something that had survived every test. "You know, Daniel, all this time, I kept wondering what I saw in you that night. Why I didn't just ignore you like any other customer. And did you figure it out?" She nodded slowly. "You looked like a man who hadn't been told no in years, and I wanted to remind you that no doesn't mean rejection. Sometimes it means not yet. He breathed out a quiet laugh. Not yet, he repeated. That's fair. They stood there close enough to feel the weight of every memory between them. The air hummed with something unspoken, a question neither dared to ask, but both already knew the answer to. Finally, she broke the silence. You can stay here tonight. It's late. The buses aren't running. He hesitated. Are you sure? Not really, she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. But maybe that's what trust feels like. He nodded, his chest tight with gratitude. Then I'll stay. She handed him a blanket, the same one she used to curl under during long nights after he'd disappeared. He unfolded it, fingers brushing the worn edges. Still the same blanket, still the same story, she said softly. Just a different chapter. He looked at her for a long moment before lying down on the couch. The light from the window touched his face, highlighting the lines that success had carved and failure had softened. Lena turned off the lamp, her silhouette outlined by the city glow. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Lena. Minutes passed. The radiator hissed, the city breathed, and in the fragile quiet both of them lay awake, aware of the miracle it was to still be in the same room after everything that had tried to pull them apart. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering the city like forgiveness. And somewhere in the stillness between heartbeats, a truth settled in quietly. Some love stories aren't about perfect beginnings or grand gestures. They're about two broken souls who finally learn how to stay. The morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains, painting soft gold across the walls. Daniel woke to the sound of clinking dishes and the faint hum of music coming from the kitchen. For a second, he forgot where he was. Then he saw her, Lena, moving quietly, pouring coffee, barefoot on the cold tile floor. The sight alone made something inside him settle. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. You're up early, she turned, smiling faintly. Old habits. The city doesn't wait for late risers. He stood and joined her, accepting the cup she offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way she liked it. You still make it this way? She shrugged. You liked it once. I like it more now, he said. And for the first time it wasn't a line, it was the truth. They ate in silence for a while, comfortable this time. There was no storm hanging over them, no scandal waiting to strike. Just two people sharing a small kitchen table, the world outside reduced to background noise. After breakfast, Lena opened the window. The air was crisp, full of the city's ordinary music, buses, voices, wind. She watched the street below where kids were throwing snowballs near the hydrant that had once flooded the block. Life had moved on, and so had she. You know, she said softly, you never told me why you came back that night. The night everything started. Daniel leaned against the wall, thinking back. I was sitting in my car ready to drive home, but I couldn't stop thinking about you returning that tip. Nobody had ever done that before. It wasn't about the money. It was the way you looked at me, like I was still capable of being someone decent. You were, she said gently. You just forgot. He smiled. Then you reminded me. They stood there for a while, the silence between them easy now. She turned to face him, the morning light tracing her features. What are you going to do next? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I'll keep working with the housing fund, help rebuild what I once helped destroy. She nodded. Good. The city could use a few more people like that. And you? He asked. I'll keep doing what I'm doing, she said. Helping people who can't afford to lose what little they have. Maybe open that cafe one day. Something honest, small. He studied her, admiration softening his features. You always knew how to make small things matter. And you, she said, smiling, finally learned that big things don't. He laughed, shaking his head. You make it sound so simple. It is, she replied. We just like to complicate it. The kettle began to whistle again. She turned to switch it off, but he reached past her, brushing her hand lightly. For a moment, they both froze, his touch no longer hesitant, her breath no longer uncertain. I don't want to lose this, he said quietly. You won't, she answered, as long as we stop trying to own it. He looked at her then, not as a man who had fallen from wealth, but as someone who had finally arrived where he was supposed to be. I think I understand now, he said softly. Love beyond money isn't about sacrifice, it's about choice, choosing to stay when it's hard, choosing to be kind when you could walk away. She nodded, her eyes glistening. That's what makes it real. He leaned closer, and for the first time since their worlds collided, there was no fear between them, just warmth, fragile and human. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that two people inside a small apartment had quietly rewritten what redemption looked like. Later that day, they walked to the diner together, the place where it had all begun. It had new owners now, new faces behind the counter. Nobody recognized them. Daniel insisted on paying for breakfast. When he left the tip, she laughed. "You're not serious." "Completely," he said, "but only if you take it this time." She looked at the money, then at him, shaking her head with a smile. "Fine, just don't expect change," he grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." As they stepped back into the cold, hand in hand, the moment felt like closure. Not the kind that ends a story, but the kind that lets it breathe. They walked past Maple and 10th, where construction had once threatened to erase everything. The building stood proud now, its old bricks restored, its windows full of light. Children played in front of it, laughter echoing through the air. Daniel stopped, taking it all in. "I almost destroyed this," he said quietly. "But you didn't," Lena replied. "You gave it back." He turned to her. "No, you did," she smiled. "Maybe we both did." They stood there, surrounded by the sound of life continuing, until the cold nudged them forward again. When they reached the corner, she slipped her arm through his. "Come on, billionaire, the coffee's on me this time." He laughed softly. "I think I can live with that." As they disappeared into the crowd, the world kept moving, unaware that somewhere among its endless noise, two people had finally found peace not in wealth or power, but in something rarer, forgiveness that held. And though their love would never make headlines again, it no longer needed to. Because the truest stories don't end with applause, they end with understanding. Before the credits of their quiet life rolled, Daniel looked at her one last time, the faintest smile playing on his lips. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saying no." Lena squeezed his hand. "It was the only way you'd ever learn to say yes." They kept walking, into the morning light, into the simple promise of ordinary love, and into a future where redemption wasn't a dream anymore. Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people.